Today we're taking a second look at border, margin, and padding, but this time from the point of view of HTML and CSS. And there's shorthands for the size of margin, border, and padding, just as there is for WPF and XAML. But the problem is in WPF and XAML it starts from the left and then works it way around clockwise. So the first parameter in a for parameter would be left, the next parameter would be top, the next parameter would be right, and the last parameter would be bottom. In HTML and CSS, and I have no idea why they did this except to screw people up that use both languages, it starts from the top. So if you have four parameters, the first parameter will be the top parameter, second parameter will be the right parameter, third parameter will be the bottom parameter, and the fourth parameter will be the left parameter. And if you only have two parameters, the first parameter represents the top and the bottom, and the second parameter represents the left and the right. So it's the exact reverse with two parameters of what it is in XAML and WPF. Once again, the margins are the red arrows that represent the distance between the box and any other objects or the container. And then the border is the actual square around the box, which may or may not be visible. You could have an invisible border in effect so that the margin and padding just becomes spacing. And then the padding is the distance between the border and the content. So it's how much space you have between the box and the content contained in the box. I should warn you at this point, there's a ton of different parameters in this subject, margin, border, and padding, mainly because you can specify margin with shorthand values like we discussed before, like these three, where you have one parameter that represents all four dimensions, a second parameter that represents top and bottom and left and right, or specify top, right, bottom, and left explicitly. And then you can also have qualified properties that like margin top and margin bottom, margin right and margin left, and this continues on. It's almost a nightmare with border. There's so many. And what I decided was to just put these as a big comment on my website at the end of the program I'm demoing this with, so that you can look it up anytime you want to, since you're probably not going to want to memorize all this. The border styles are kind of interesting. You can have none, dotted, dashed, solid, double, groove, ridged, inset, or outset. And then you can specify border color, which you can specify explicitly as border dash color, or you can specify in a shorthand way in a 3-parameter attribute to just the property border. And you can specify it as a name. You can specify it as a RGB value, like RGB 255, 0, 0, where 255 is the red value. The first 0 is the green value, and the third 0 is the blue value. Or you can specify as a hex value with a pound sign, and then have FF0000, which is the same as the RGB above. It's all red, no green, and no blue, or some combinations of these to get about any color you want. And you can also specify the border color as transparent. And then for border, you have things like border top width, border right width, and so on. So you can qualify that the same way, or you can use the shorthand values like we described for the other too, padding and margin. And as I said, probably the most common use of border is to just use this shorthand, where you say border and then you have the width, the style, and the color. So that this is 1 pixel border solid with a black color. And show all the permutations at the bottom. And as I said, I put all these in a comment at the end of the program, so that if you want to look these up, just go to my website and go to the library and click on this program, and you can get a comment listing of all these different permutations. Well, in the program itself, I have an internal style sheet, which is a style type equals text/CSS within the head of the web page. And then I specify a style for H2 and 3 classes, odd div, even div, and last div. And then once again I have 3 IDs, odd ID, even ID, and last ID. And of course class is largely for large blocks of things, and ID is for smaller things, or actually it's the reverse of that in original intention, but in fact class and ID are more or less used interchangeably now. But in this case I use ID for the span and class for the div. So that's the way I'm using it, but I think that's actually the reverse of the original intent. The original intent was to use ID for divs and class for short spans. But as I say, they're now totally interchangeable. And one thing I didn't mention in the comments that's extremely useful is you can specify sizes as percents also, which is great for things like centering the box. Like I have margin left is 35% and margin right is 35%. So 70% of the space is taken up in the margin, which means the middle 30% has a centered box, which is great for dynamic flow layouts like are used extensively in WPF and XAML. And here I have this shorthand version of border with a dashed border, a double border, and a dotted border, and I use RGB value for background here. And let's see, am I using a hex value somewhere? Yes, I have a hex value for background here, C0, 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 which is sort of a nice light gray color. So if we run this in the Chrome browser, see for the H2 we get this really cool looking picture frame type thing with the groove border. And then we have the dashed border, the double border, and the dotted border. And the div controls these values, and the ID controls the cogito, ergo sum, cogito span values. So you can see we can pretty much create the same exact effect, and if we squeeze it up, you see it continues to be centered, much the way that WPF and XAML has a dynamic flow. So pretty much identical concepts. Essentially supports my case that XAML and WPF are the children of HTML and CSS, although I think XAML and WPF have taken it a step further and are actually much better in doing the job. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned a lot, and I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe.